For centuries, heaven and hell have been painted as the ultimate destinations of the soul, one a place of eternal bliss, the other of eternal torment. But what if everything you've been told about them is not the truth? Carson of 4Biddenknowledge has been challenging long-standing religious narratives, revealing ancient wisdom, hidden texts, and suppressed knowledge that suggest heaven and hell may not be what you think. Today, we'll explore the origins of these concepts, the evidence that challenges traditional teachings, and what it all means for humanity's spiritual awakening. Most people believe heaven and hell come directly from the Bible, but Carson highlights that these ideas are far older. Ancient Sumerian, Babylonian, and Egyptian texts spoke of afterlife realms long before Christianity existed. The Church, over centuries, adapted and reshaped these myths into rigid doctrines. Heaven became a reward for obedience, while hell became a threat for disobedience. This manipulation wasn't just about faith, it was about control. By dictating what happens after death, the Church gained immense power over people's lives. The deeper you dig into history, the more you find that these concepts are rooted in metaphor and symbolism, not literal places of eternal residence. Carson argues that the soul's journey is far more complex and expansive than a simple two-option afterlife. Carson often emphasizes that fear has been one of the most effective tools of religious institutions. The idea of hell, an eternity of fire and suffering, was not just theological, it was psychological. It created an invisible prison in people's minds. By making followers believe that questioning the Church would lead to eternal damnation, dissent was silenced. Historical records reveal that the idea of hell evolved alongside the Church's growing political influence, especially during the Middle Ages, when fear-based preaching was at its peak. Carson's research points out that spiritual texts across cultures describe the afterlife in more symbolic and cyclical ways, focusing on soul growth rather than eternal punishment. This suggests that the hell most people fear today is a man-made invention designed to serve earthly power rather than divine truth. Carson draws heavily from the suppressed Gnostic Gospels and other ancient writings that the Church deliberately excluded from the Bible. These texts often described heaven and hell as states of consciousness rather than physical places. In Gnostic tradition, heaven represented enlightenment and unity with the divine, while hell symbolized spiritual ignorance and separation from truth. This view aligns more closely with modern metaphysical interpretations, where the soul experiences realities based on its vibration, awareness, and alignment with universal laws. Carson suggests that this deeper understanding was intentionally hidden to keep people dependent on external authority rather than their own spiritual journey. If humanity embraced this perspective, the entire framework of religious control would crumble. A fascinating angle in Carson's work is the idea that ancient civilizations encoded cosmic truths into their spiritual teachings. He points out that many descriptions of heaven mirror depictions of star systems and celestial realms, while hell often represents chaotic cosmic regions or lower vibrational dimensions. Ancient Egyptians spoke of the duat, a multi-layered afterlife journey involving trials and cosmic travel. Likewise, Sumerian myths describe a descent into the underworld as a metaphor for soul transformation. Carson believes the Church stripped away these cosmic elements and replaced them with simplistic good versus evil narratives, cutting humanity off from a vast understanding of its place in the universe. If heaven and hell are not literal destinations, then the question becomes, what is the real goal of our spiritual journey? Carson's answer is clear: self-mastery, expanded consciousness, and connection to the infinite. He encourages people to stop fearing an external judgment and instead focus on evolving their inner state. This means questioning long-held beliefs, studying ancient wisdom, and embracing direct spiritual experiences rather than relying solely on dogma. The Church's version of heaven and hell may have been a tool for control, but reclaiming the truth about the afterlife opens the door to genuine liberation. Carson's message is both empowering and challenging. You are the architect of your soul's destiny, and no institution can dictate where you go after this life. Carson points out that much of the misunderstanding about heaven and hell comes from mistranslations. Words like Sheol, Hades, and Gehenna in ancient texts were never meant to signify eternal fire pits, but rather temporary places of the dead or symbolic states of being. Over centuries, as the Bible was translated into Latin, Greek, and later into English, these nuanced meanings were lost or intentionally altered. For example, Gehenna referred to a valley outside Jerusalem associated with purification rituals, not an eternal inferno. Yet, the church used such altered terms to create a vivid, terrifying picture of hell, one that's stuck in people's minds for generations. Fear of eternal judgment creates a deep-rooted psychological dependency. Carson argues that this dependency keeps people in a constant state of guilt and self-doubt, ensuring they always look to religious leaders for absolution. This dynamic mirrors the way abusive systems operate, by breaking down self-trust and replacing it with unquestioning obedience. The threat of hell becomes a mental leash, keeping followers from exploring other spiritual paths or questioning church authority. Carson's advice is to replace fear with curiosity and to study spirituality from multiple cultural lenses, breaking free from inherited mental prisons. Long before organized religion, ancient cultures recorded accounts of people who died and returned to tell their stories. Carson connects these early near-death experiences to modern ones, noting that they rarely describe a binary heaven or hell. Instead, people speak of light, review of their lives, and encounters with beings of wisdom. The idea of eternal damnation appears absent in these testimonies, both ancient and modern. This suggests that the afterlife is a spectrum of experiences, tailored to each soul's vibration and awareness, not a fixed judgment handed down by a divine authority. When Christianity became the official religion of Rome, political leaders saw the value in controlling the narrative about the afterlife. Carson's research shows that the Roman Empire actively reshaped Christian doctrine to align with imperial needs. By promoting a fear of hell, rulers could ensure social order and loyalty. The manipulation of spiritual concepts became a tool of governance, blending politics, religion, and law into one powerful force. This is why many early Christian texts, such as those found at Nag Hammadi, were banned or destroyed. They offered a version of spiritual truth that did not support the empire's agenda. Carson often compares Christian hell to similar concepts in other religions, such as Naraka in Hinduism or Diyu in Chinese Buddhism. In these traditions, hellish realms are temporary, serving as stages of purification before the soul moves on. There is no eternal punishment. There is no eternal punishment. Carson highlights that the eternal, never-ending hell is almost unique to Christianity's later interpretation. This suggests that the forever burning narrative is less a universal spiritual truth and more a historical invention. Just as hell was used to scare, heaven was used to entice. Carson notes that heaven was often described as a place of eternal rest, comfort, and reward, but only for those who obeyed specific rules and hierarchies. This reward system worked hand in hand with the threat of hell to create a complete behavioral control structure. In essence, it was a cosmic carrot and stick method. This framing also discouraged people from seeking joy or enlightenment in this life, making them more compliant to earthly authorities in the hope of future rewards. Modern metaphysical studies align more with the Gnostic idea that heaven and hell are vibrational states rather than places. Carson incorporates the concept of the astral plane, a multi-dimensional reality where souls travel after death. Here, high vibration realms feel heavenly and low vibration realms feel hellish. This framework removes the idea of an external judge and replaces it with a natural law of resonance. You go where your consciousness aligns. Such a model is empowering because it puts the responsibility and the possibility for change directly in your hands. Carson frequently brings up the Vatican's vast secret archives, which reportedly contain thousands of ancient manuscripts never shown to the public. He speculates that many of these writings detail alternative views of the afterlife, cosmic origins, and the nature of the soul. If released, these texts could dismantle the Church's monopoly on spiritual truth. Carson believes that secrecy serves a clear purpose. By controlling information, religious authorities maintain control over people's beliefs, and therefore their behaviors. During the Renaissance, artists were commissioned by the church to depict heaven and hell in grand, vivid ways. From Michelangelo's The Last Judgment to countless stained glass windows, these images embedded the church's vision into the collective psyche. Carson emphasizes that these weren't just works of art, they were propaganda tools. By constantly surrounding people with imagery of blissful heavens and terrifying hells, the church ensured that even the illiterate absorbed its doctrine visually. Carson traces many Christian afterlife concepts back to pre-Christian pagan traditions. The Greek Hades, the Norse Helheim, and the Egyptian Duat all feature in the evolutionary chain of afterlife ideas. However, in these traditions, the afterlife was more about cycles, journeys, and transformation than eternal reward or punishment. The church's genius and deception was in freezing this dynamic process into two fixed destinations, forever locking souls into a spiritual binary. When Christian missionaries spread across the world, they used heaven and hell as persuasive tools to convert indigenous populations. Carson notes that entire cultures were dismantled by this fear-based conversion strategy. By undermining local spiritual systems and replacing them with the heaven-hell dichotomy, missionaries not only changed beliefs, but also broke down social and political structures, paving the way for colonial domination. Carson ties modern research on consciousness to ancient spiritual ideas. Quantum physics and neuroscience suggest that consciousness may not originate in the brain, but may be a fundamental part of the universe. If true, this supports the idea that the afterlife is a continuation of consciousness rather than a divine judgment system. This scientific perspective undermines the literal heaven-hell framework and aligns more closely with the soul's vibrational journey described in suppressed spiritual texts. Many ancient cultures considered dreams as glimpses into the afterlife or parallel dimensions. Carson notes that both heaven-like and hell-like dreamscapes can be experienced based on one's emotional and spiritual state. This supports the theory that afterlife experiences are shaped by the consciousness you carry. In other words, your heaven or hell is already being built within you while you live. One of Carson's most challenging assertions is that waiting for an external savior, whether to grant heaven or prevent hell, is a disempowering belief. It keeps people passive and dependent, rather than active participants in their spiritual growth. In his view, salvation is an inside job, requiring self-awareness, responsibility, and direct connection to the divine without intermediaries. Many ancient cultures and mystery schools taught reincarnation, a concept largely excluded from Christian doctrine. Carson argues that without reincarnation, the heaven-hell binary makes little sense. It oversimplifies the soul's evolution. Reincarnation suggests that the soul learns and grows over multiple lifetimes, visiting different realms as needed for its development. This view removes the fear of eternal punishment and replaces it with the idea of continuous growth. Fear is a currency, and Carson believes the church built an entire economy on it. From indulgences sold to buy one's way out of hell to mandatory donations framed as securing your place in heaven, the afterlife became monetized. This system ensured financial stability for the institution while keeping the public emotionally invested in its control. Carson, well known for exploring ancient astronaut theories, suggests that early heaven descriptions might have been inspired by encounters with advanced beings or off-world civilizations. These encounters, misunderstood by ancient people, could have been mythologized into divine afterlife narratives. If true, the original heaven may have been more about cosmic contact than eternal rest. Carson stresses that beliefs about heaven and hell are often inherited, not chosen. Families pass down these teachings unquestioned, locking generations into the same fear-based mindset. Breaking this cycle requires conscious effort, researching original texts, exploring multiple traditions, and developing personal spiritual practices outside institutional influence. Ultimately, Carson believes that personal spiritual experiences, through meditation, astral travel, or deep introspection, hold more truth than any secondhand doctrine. Once someone has directly experienced higher states of consciousness or glimpses of the afterlife, the manufactured fear of hell begins to dissolve. This is the path to true freedom, knowing, rather than believing, what awaits beyond this life. Billy Carson points out that the church not only exaggerated hell, but also exaggerated the definition of sin to fill it. In early spiritual traditions, sin was often understood as a mistake or misalignment with divine law, something that could be corrected through personal growth. Over time, the church expanded the list of sins, turning natural human impulses into moral crimes. This created a constant sense of spiritual debt, making followers feel perpetually unworthy without church intervention. By doing this, the heaven-hell system became self-perpetuating. You are told you are guilty, threatened with hell, and offered salvation only through the institution that created the fear. When people believe life is merely a test for the afterlife, they may neglect their responsibility to care for the earth. Carson highlights how this belief has justified centuries of exploitation, colonization, and environmental destruction. If the real heaven is beyond this life, then this world becomes disposable. By removing the binary afterlife model, spirituality becomes about improving life here and now, creating a kind of heaven on earth through conscious living and stewardship. Carson aligns with the view that hell is not a place you go to, but a state you create, often while still alive. Persistent guilt, unresolved trauma, hatred, and fear can create a personal hell that shapes one's reality. In death, this state may manifest as a lower vibrational realm. This means that the church's most powerful lie may be not that hell exists, but that it exists outside of you. In truth, we carry our heaven or hell with us wherever we go, including into the afterlife. While hell keeps people in fear, heaven as a reward can promote spiritual laziness. Carson warns that some believers focus only on getting into heaven without doing the hard work of self-awareness, healing, and service to others. They follow rules without ever questioning their deeper purpose. This can lead to a false sense of security, assuming salvation is automatic if one simply follows an institution's checklist. An alternative to the heaven-hell binary, which Carson often mentions, is the cosmic school theory, the idea that existence itself is a vast educational system. Each lifetime is a lesson, and each realm, physical or non-physical, offers experiences that help the soul evolve. In this framework, there is no eternal punishment, only repeated opportunities to grow. The only failure is refusing to learn. This view transforms death from a terrifying end into a continuation of the soul's journey. Carson, known for his fascination with ancient science, points out that sacred geometry, found in temples, pyramids, and spiritual symbols, represents the structure of reality. These patterns, like the flower of life, appear in descriptions of higher realms. Ancient people may have encoded these designs as maps to the heavens they experienced in altered states or after death. The church's stripping of these symbols from mainstream doctrine may have cut humanity off from the science behind spiritual ascension. In Celtic, African, and indigenous American traditions, there are rich stories of the soul's journey to the afterlife, none of which match the eternal heaven-hell model. These cultures describe guides, trials, and transformations in other realms. When Christianity spread, these complex narratives were replaced with a simplistic binary. Carson sees this as a tragedy. A rich library of human spiritual experience was reduced to a single, fear-based storyline. Carson questions the logic of eternal reward or punishment. Eternity is infinite, while human life is finite. So how could finite actions justify infinite consequences? This mismatch suggests the heaven-hell system is a human-made moral device, not a cosmic truth. In nature and in the cosmos, cycles dominate: day and night, life and death, expansion and contraction. Eternal static states simply don't fit the natural order. Carson believes that the revival of interest in meditation, astral projection, plant medicine, and ancient texts is no coincidence. As more people experience altered states of consciousness, the fear of hell loses its grip. Direct experience often reveals an interconnected, loving universe, rather than a judgmental one. This spiritual renaissance may be the biggest threat to the heaven-hell paradigm since the Gnostic era. Interestingly, Carson notes that Jesus' own teachings, when stripped of later church additions, don't align with eternal hell. Many scholars agree that Jesus spoke in parables about transformation, forgiveness, and the kingdom of heaven being within. The harshest punishments in his stories were temporary and symbolic, often representing purification rather than endless torment. This suggests the church's hell doctrine may be more Pauline or medieval in origin than truly Christ-like. The ultimate takeaway from Carson's research is liberation. When the binary of heaven and hell collapses, fear loses its power. Without fear, people can connect to the divine directly, live authentically, and take full responsibility for their lives. The soul's destiny is no longer in the hands of an institution, but in your own consciousness. Carson's challenge to the world is simple yet radical. Stop living for a promised afterlife and start creating heaven here, now. Carson often speaks about the energetic signature each soul carries. This signature, formed by thoughts, actions, emotions, and intentions, determines what kind of reality the soul experiences after death. Instead of a final judgment from an external deity, it's the universal law of resonance at work. Like attracts like. If you cultivate love, truth, and awareness, you naturally align with higher vibrational realms. If you harbor hate, greed, or deep fear, you attract lower vibrational realities. This explanation removes the arbitrariness of the heaven-hell model and makes the afterlife a natural consequence of one's inner state. Why don't we remember our past lives if reincarnation is real?